all fall when things seem down and more unfair. You gotta remember to cross the Delaware.
We're often bombarded with stories and events from the most urban and densely populated parts of our world. But as is evident, there are tales and legends that come from some of the most remote areas of the planet that hold just as much, if not more, significance to our daily discourse. One such eerie story comes from the remote wilderness of Siberia, in which a lonely but kind-hearted old woman may have answered one of the most fundamental and fascinating questions of the human experience. Namely, are we alone in the universe?
At the southern end of the withered and sometimes foreboding chain of the Ural Mountains lies a settlement by the name of Kyshteim. Life here is harsh and unforgiving much of the time, as the townsfolk are far used to the rustic way of living that their people had endured for centuries. While remote, the area was somewhat developed with key production facilities that had been operational since the Second World War. One major event of note was a nuclear fuel reprocessing plant that exploded in the winter of 1957 that resulted in a radioactive cloud of debris that covered hundreds of miles and contaminated the nearby Teka River. As related by several sources, one still and quiet night in the spring of 1996, an elderly lady by the name of Tamara was out on her nightly walk in the nearby woods surrounding Kyshteim when she began to hear faint sounds coming from the trees. As she got closer, she realized that it was the sound of a crying infant. To her surprise, it was indeed an infant lying in the middle of a trash heap. Feeling no hesitation and just seeing that a possibly injured child needed her help, Tamara picked up the baby and began her trek back to the town. Sources say that the elderly lady saw this as an opportunity to appease her loneliness and decided that she would raise the child herself. After a few days, Tamara was visited by her daughter-in-law. The two were having a pleasant visit when Tamara suggested that before her daughter-in-law left, they should feed the baby together. The younger woman was taken aback by this statement, as up until this point, there had been no mention of any child. When Tamara took her to see the infant, the young lady was dumbstruck and quite frightened at the so-called child's appearance. She later stated that the baby seemed to be far too small, but what struck her most was the enlarged size of the head and elongated bony structures that rimmed its face. The eyes darted back and forth at an almost impossible speed, and the pupils enlarged and contracted, resembling a cat. When Tamara began to feed the infant, the daughter-in-law was alarmed that the creature didn't appear to actually eat the food, but rather sucked it in through a small hole that passed for its mouth, akin to a vacuum cleaner. What was becoming increasingly clear to the younger woman was that whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. Regardless, Tamara seemed oblivious to all this and stated that she had even named the infant Aleshenka after one of her deceased grandsons. Tamara's odd behavior was also noticed by several of her neighbors. She went about her normal day in an unnaturally cheery demeanor, chatting to anybody that would listen that she had a new baby. One night she was found frantically banging at her neighbor's door. When asked what the commotion was all about, Tamara only stated that she was in a panic because Aleshenka was ill, and she had no medicine at her house. At this point, many of the townspeople had heard enough. They thought that Tamara might be suffering from a nervous or psychotic breakdown. The police were summoned, and the old lady was carted off by senior officials of a nearby mental ward. No matter how much she protested, no one would heed her pleas. It seemed Tamara's only concern was for the infant. Although their actions may have seemed harsh and quick to judgment, there was a precedent here. Several of Tamara's neighbors noted that in recent years the elderly lady had been showing signs of the onset of mental illness. For instance, it was noted that Tamara was known to frequent local cemeteries at night, take several flowers and grave ornaments, then use them to decorate her house. After Tamara's incarceration, events take a highly murky path, and the rest of the story cannot be confirmed by a large amount of credible sources. A police officer by the name of Vladimir Bendlin was said to be on duty questioning a prowler that had been captured some nights before. Thinking that this was simply a routine pickup, Vladimir casually questioned the thief as to the nature of the items he had stolen. He was shocked when the man told him he wanted to offload some of the items he had stolen and that among them was a dead infant he had acquired some time prior. Intrigued by what the man was proposing, he agreed to be taken back to the apartment of the prowler to see this dead infant for himself. Later at the apartment, Vladimir was confronted with something he could only describe as the dried-up, mummified corpse of a small humanoid. In subsequent interviews, Vladimir said that the body resembled that of an unborn fetus that was deformed and emaciated. Vladimir immediately began questioning where the man had obtained the body. The thief gave differing accounts and in one story claimed that he had been present with Tamara when she found the infant. He claimed to be out of town when Tamara was taken to the hospital, but by that time Aleshenka had died. Noting the curiosity, he decided to take the oddity home. In another account, he claimed that he had broken into Tamara's apartment and had stolen the already mummified corpse of the creature, along with several other items he had lifted. And in yet another account, he said that it was Tamara herself who had given him the corpse to be given a proper burial after Aleshenka had died. Whatever the truth behind the acquisition, Vladimir seized the mummified body to have properly analyzed by scientific authorities. After weeks of silence, Vladimir finally got several tests results back. To his shock, it was found that the mummified body was not that of a human being at all, but something of a far-known alien origin. When probing further, it was found that the body contained features that would be impossible for any human to be born with, even in the most severe cases of birth defect. It was found that the skull only contained 4 bones, and the head had been unnaturally elongated. Vladimir did his best to keep the results under wraps, but nevertheless, news leaked of the supposed alien origin of the corpse, and it began to spread amongst the residents of Kyshteim that Tamara had been in possession of an alien child. Local press got a hold of the story, and from there it got out to the masses. What followed was a press-feeding frenzy about the supposed Kyshteim Alien. Several people came forward claiming to have information, but most turned out to be opportunistic attention seekers, more than happy to cash in on the journalists' voracious appetite to get the story. Wild accusations that Vladimir had concocted the entire incident to make money soon flew in his direction, but he refuted all these allegations. With mounting pressure to prove what he was saying, Vladimir handed the mummified body over to a respected UFO expert named Boris Zolotov. Vladimir hoped to finally get an answer as to Aleshenka's true origins. But as time went on, Vladimir grew increasingly concerned, as he could not get a hold of Boris to inquire about his findings. The man seemed to disappear for a number of months before reappearing with a bizarre story. He claimed that a short while after Vladimir had handed over the body, Boris gave the remains over to one of his assistants to be driven by car to a specialized lab near Moscow. En route, the assistant said that a large metallic craft blocked one of the deserted side roads. Unbelievably, the assistant claimed that several alien creatures emerged from the craft and demanded that the body be handed over to them. Frightened beyond words, the assistant complied, and at that, the alien beings flew off with the remains of Aleshenka. When pressed further, Boris refused to elaborate and would not discuss the matter in any more detail, claiming that he was beginning to receive threats from agents he believed came directly from the Russian government. Boris's assertions have been obviously challenged, with some sources even going so far as saying that he sold the body to an eccentric collector for an absorbent amount of money. Whatever the case, either alien abduction, government agents, or a high-stakes private collector, all we know for certain is that the body of little Aleshenka was never seen again. "8 years after the body's original examination, one of the researchers that Vladimir had in the preliminary tests recanted her statements, now claiming that there was nothing alien or unnatural with the body, that it was simply an undeveloped fetus that had died of undernourishment. The doctor was of the belief that Aleshenka was a deformed infant that was a result of the nuclear fallout of the explosion of the reprocessing plant of 1957. Furthermore, it is claimed that Tamara had escaped the psychiatric ward in which she had been held sometime in late 1999 or early 2000. She made it back to Kyshteim but was unfortunately killed in a hit-and-run accident. Conspiracy theorists contend that her death was no accident and that she was deliberately silenced to keep her quiet about the Aleshenka incident. With the last remaining sources of the story going to the grave with her, it seems we may never know who or what the infant Aleshenka truly was.
So now we're left to wonder. What was it that Tamara found in the dark woods in '96? Was the infant Aleshenka a malformed child thrown away by unwilling parents? Or was he indeed an emissary from the stars that met an untimely fate? Those are questions we may never answer. However, if you ever find yourself walking alone near the woods at night, and you hear the faint cries of a child in the distance, you may want to pay attention to the sign up ahead. You know, the one that reads, "Question everything, and trust no one." Until next time.